Lesson 11, Mark chapter 5. We're going to be in verses 21 through 43 tonight. So this is the miracle in the miracle. You guys may recall, I think it was maybe the second or third week that we did this Bible study. We talked about the idea of intercalation, where there'd be a sandwiching of one thing within another. And we talked about then that Mark would use intercalation usually to make some sort of a point. And hopefully I remember to ask you what you think that point is at the back end. I'll make a little note to myself to ask you what you think that is. I don't have it on the piece of paper. But these are definitely related miracle accounts, I think. And a lot of that'll come out during our conversation tonight. Again, I kind of broke it up a bit, probably in your Bibles. It may all be under one heading, but because of the intercalation that goes there, I kind of did an A and a B and an A to make a little more sense out of it. Matter of fact, some of the commentaries, what they do is they take the first and the second half and they wed it together and do it as one entire thing. And then they'll do the central part separate from that. So it kind of threw me off on a couple of my commentaries when it jumped from verse 24 to verse 35. I was like, oh, where'd the other go? And it's like, oh, they put it after that. So kind of what they did to make it easier. So but we're going to follow it in the order in which it comes to us in this passage. So we're going to look at verses 21 through 24 first. And this is essentially, as the heading says, when we see Jairus come to Jesus, asking him to heal his daughter. So we begin there. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. If you recall last week, we ended essentially with the people among the Gerasenes saying, "You need to go." And they didn't drive Jesus off, but they invited him to leave their region. And so it's interesting that Jesus comes back to the Jewish side of the lake, the west side of the lake. And many believe that he probably landed near Capernaum, is where this is, which makes sense, but there's really no absolute clues about that. And we see that he's received in a very different way than he was when he was on the other side with the Gerasenes. Markedly different. Thronged by the people. Very receptive to him, at least in the works that he could do, not necessarily his message. Now, is that Dan and Paula?
No, it's Susan.
Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi.
Welcome. You must still be traveling.
No, I'm laying down because of my stomach.
Okay, we prayed for you at the beginning, so relax. Glad you're with us.
Thank you.
Glad you're with us.
Okay.
So it tells us here in verse 22 that Jairus was a ruler of the synagogue. And so if you go dig around in that a little bit, what you find out is that typically a ruler of the synagogue was actually a layman, and that they were responsible for, they were kind of like a mix of a trustee and a deacon and that kind of a thing in the synagogue, that they are responsible for the building and grounds, and they are also responsible for coordinating the religious services. And I'm sure that included, when they had guest speakers and that sort of thing, but making sure there were people to hit their marks in the different parts of the services. And so that's who he would have been. And he would have been a well-respected man in the community. He was definitely a pillar of the community, for what it's worth. And so this Jairus was an important man. And I think it makes sense, right? Especially if this is Capernaum, that Jairus could well have had contact with Jesus before. He knew who he was. How much he had made a fuss about Jesus is another issue altogether. But anybody that was as plugged into the community as Jairus would have been certainly had heard about Jesus. And that's kind of the bottom line on that. And so he comes to Jesus asking for help. And so I asked this question, and we're kind of jumping way ahead kind of to think about this, but it'll help us kind of look at this guy a little bit more and kind of what his circumstance was. I asked this first question: what does Jairus's appeal to Jesus teach us about reaching others for Jesus today in our culture? And so you've got to really think about his circumstance and his position in answering that question. What do you guys think? Because obviously he come to Jesus looking for something.
Well, it's kind of evident that he must have known Jesus prior, or had heard of him prior to that, just like you said, because he came to Jesus knowing that Jesus could heal his daughter. So he actually came out, with boldness in the faith to ask for healing for his daughter.
Okay, so I heard the word boldness there. Let's take that and run with that for a minute. So, what does this say about where he was at this point, as far as the circumstance, the situation, to create that boldness? And Larry, you can answer that, or anybody else want to jump in either.
Well, like I said, either he had heard about Jesus's healing ability, or he had been present at one of the healings. And I don't know which that was because it doesn't say.
Right.
But by him knowing, and he's got prior knowledge that Jesus can and will heal his daughter. So for him to just go up to Jesus and say, hey, my daughter is dying and I need you to come and lay hands on her, that's like being out and moving out in faith and nothing else, basically.
Okay. You got something?
I think there's this, going back to your question about the boldness, I think he was at the point where, like Larry said, he knew that Jesus could heal his daughter, and he was desperate for that healing to take place. And so when you're desperate for things, you do things in a manner in which there's no stopping you.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're in a desperate position, what does that do as far as you kind of banging right up against this? I'm looking for maybe a word or a thought here. Is when you're at that point and you're really not seeing a lot of other options. How does that make you? What does that do? And again, you can answer this or anybody else. What does that do to your as far as Jesus is concerned? As far as somebody talking about Jesus to you? If you're in that position,
It makes you more open to hearing it.
that's where I was kind of heading. I'm looking for a word.
Receptive.
There it is. Yeah, it does make you open. It makes you receptive to the message. Whereas, I don't know if any of you have been there before you knew Christ, or if you've known people. We don't prey on people, P-R-E-Y, on people, but lots of times when people are the most receptive to Jesus and the message of the gospel is in the aftermath of a family member's death, when there's a sickness. Why do you think people go visiting people in the hospital? Right? I mean, it's not just to pray over the sick people. It's to be able to minister to their families. Right? Because there's a point where they've run out of options. Larry, where you were heading on that. Christine, the way you talked about that. They all of a sudden it's like, well, I got nothing to lose. Right?
They become more vulnerable.
Vulnerable is a great word for it, Ruth. That's exactly right.
I mean, they'll just scramble till they get it taken care of.
Well, it's an effective point of enforced humility. You
I
know,
was
kind
gonna
of,
say their pride goes away.
yeah, and that's a big part of the whole story of our relationship to God throughout the Bible. Is the sin started with pride more than anything else.
Yep.
Satan wants to be pride. I'll be this. I'll be that. Tells Eve, "Hey, eat this thing, and you'll be this, and you'll be that." And it's all about not needing God. And so, stumbling upon, or diving into a position of, I have nothing left but my humility and dependence. That's when a gospel message becomes real, rather
Amen.
than just some academic, I should probably get this taken care of before I forget about it kind of thing. It's a meaningful message.
Absolutely.
Well, and then the other thing I was thinking
I
about
saw you, John, by the way. I'll catch you in a second.
when you were talking, Trent, was, Jairus being a ruler of the synagogue, he has a position in their society, in that culture, and he didn't care that he had that position at that point. So regardless of your stature in life, there comes a point where you don't care what other people think. You know what you need, and you're willing to accept it.
I like you brought that up. I'm going to put a pin there because I think there's another point there, maybe in a different way, but I like it's really weird, John, with her here, and she's talking. I'm watching her on the screen, and then she's looking at me. So it's kind of like we're in the bathroom looking in the mirror at each other. John, what'd you have?
Well, I was going to say before that he probably disregarded what the Pharisees were saying about Jesus and their attitude and feelings toward him. That he really stepped over the Pharisees to get to Jesus.
Which means in a very real way, what?
Pardon me?
Which means you're right. Which means in a very real way, what was he doing as far as his status and position?
Well, he may be putting it in jeopardy, but that wasn't as important to him as his daughter was.
Right. There it is. There it is. Yeah, he's going to do anything he can do to get his daughter saved.
Yeah. They would have been very, very upset with him. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, the get together that year for whatever they got together for, right? When he saw each other in Jerusalem for the next holiday, it was going to be a little testy, maybe.
So I could be that guy for a second on this one. I love the optimistic view of Mr. Jairus here. Probably right, and I'd rather think highly of people if I can. But what also
that guy? Yeah, I like when you're that guy. Go ahead.
Yeah, what also echoes pretty strongly with how people are today is he starts out with a very instrumental relationship, a transactional relationship.
Yes.
I came to find you because I need this thing from you, and I think you're the guy. And there's a lot of people that see not just Jesus and the church and the whole life that way, politics, their business, their friendships, their whatever. People are very transactional these days.
Yeah.
And Jairus isn't the only one in the Bible that, interacts this way. It seems like it's a human thing. And I think that might point to why do we have this story within a story that comes up. Jesus needs to make a point in Jairus' face and say, hey, let's think about how you're thinking about this. So it's a could be.
I got to get into that in the next set of questions. So you might get to grind in that one a little bit more for a while. I like that you say that, though. I deal with that regularly in my real estate business, is that I have some people that I get leads through my company or what have you. And I have some people that it's absolutely, they call me, they want to know about a property, they want to know a price, and then I answer the question and I'll try to kind of hang on to them and, try to develop a rapport. And they're like, thank you, I'm done, click, they're done, right? And I have a lot of them. And then I have people that, they're like, oh, you can help me, you can be my real estate agent, we can kind of have a long-term thing. And it develops into that to the point that some of my clients have become friends, but so many people today, you're right. It's like, what can you do for me in this situation? I've used you, I'm done. And so, and certainly that is the case when it comes to people's church and salvation situations, for sure. Maybe they've always been like that. We live in this culture. I don't know. I have to think through that. I want to circle back around though. Christine was talking about his position. What do you guys think about that? Because then that's another truth that I see in this when it comes to Jairus's position, as it relates to us today in reaching people for Christ. Kind of a simple little truth.
You mean more like he's a super spreader type of position?
Not where I was thinking.
Or,
I don't even want to hear that word again. Don't just strike that from our lexicon.
okay, slightly previous, and this is, I got the marketing business school background, but like an influencer, like on Instagram or whatever platforms we're using, you could just broadcast something out and it'll land on some people. I don't know if you're selling something or you just, want to share or whatever. But if you know that one person that just happens to really connect really well with people, they're positioned well to connect, and they're just that gregarious type that is going to spread something, even if it's just, hey, I really want one of those, frat party movie things where 4,000 people show up to my pool party. I need to call that guy and get them going, because then other people will show up. Or, you're trying to sell something. I need this person to be my key entry into this whole area, and they're going to do most of the work for me.
Yeah, I had this picture of a John Hughes movie. I just, where you took me on that. I wasn't thinking about that, but that's an interesting idea too, right? I mean, but don't you think sometimes, I've heard Christians actually say this, well, if we could lead him to Christ, ... And it's like, I just don't, it's like, well, if we could, we always talk about that with Hollywood, right? Like, I think everybody thought, Preston, you've talked about this, when Kanye West came to know Jesus, that was just going to revolutionize the Jesus movement in North America. It's like, well, if we get, some of these giant Instagram people, like, what's her name? Ariana Grande. She's got like 16 million Instagram followers or some such thing like that. It's like, chances are, if she decided she wanted to follow Jesus, it'd be Hollywood weird, right? I mean, that's the challenge with that. I'm not going to mention any names. This gets recorded and somehow I get on some sort of libel charge. But it's interesting that you say that, because I think that can be the case, right? Somebody comes to know Jesus that's really excited, and they can really supercharge a group for sure. And an influencer, I'm surprised you did you use that word, influencer? Did you use that word? Yeah, I thought I heard that come up. Justin Bieber, yeah, that.
Well, I almost picture him like Cousin Max in The Sound of Music, where he's like the guy that's instrumental in setting up the whole music festival thing, and he knows everybody in town.
Right.
And he's kind of the guy that wants to just go with the wind and, just play the angles and stuff. But but as far as like the synagogue service, he's that guy that is going around, booking the talent almost.
Yeah. All right. So there's that. I hadn't thought about that. So that was a little different wing than I was thinking about from the position standpoint. Any other thoughts on that?
My thought.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, my thought is he recognized a higher power and a higher authority instead of consulting his immediate supervisors, the Pharisees, and the law on what his action as a member of the synagogue would be in accordance with the law. He said, I'm going to that guy. He recognized it as a better source.
Yeah. It's great when people do that, right?
Well,
As opposed to asking your neighbor, Chris?
his daughter's been dying or has been ill to the point of dying. And his faith or his religion or his church or synagogue hasn't solved his problem. So he's desperate. He's looking for somebody else. And he's heard of somebody that has performed miracles. So he's reaching out, he's grasping for straws because his religion, his church, his religion, his synagogue has failed him or hasn't met his expectation.
Yeah, that's a real interesting phrase there, because you're taking that desperation and you're adding to it the fact that his worldview, if I can use that phrase, has failed him at this point, which there's a lot of that going around today. I think they're just going to keep trying other things other than Jesus.
I got a question for you, more learned. What do you think that the synagogue would have done to him had they known at that point in time what he was doing?
I think the short answer is they did. I mean, word's going to get back pretty darn fast, isn't it?
He was in front of a large crowd.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't. My sense is, and you guys, I don't have an answer. My sense is his daughter's dying. You know, I would hope there'd be some grace there, but I don't know how that mechanism worked in their day, and how, even though we're talking about the Pharisees, you know, what sort of autonomy did he have? I'm just not sure.
also,
I think where you're heading, Larry, is would he get relieved of his duty, for example? Would he be somehow censored for that?
Yeah.
He took a risk, I think, because he was going to this man, and they I think it may be more from the standpoint, it's less of a formal kind of thing, and it's more of they were starting to build a case against Jesus. So I think it would be more of an influence thing than necessarily a mechanical. But was that you, Trent? Who was that?
yeah. I also think, at least by this point, there hadn't been a ton of the building a charge of blasphemy yet.
Right. We hadn't gotten there yet.
The conspiracy has not really progressed very far. So far, in Mark, the only other healing story so far recorded was the paralytic guy that got lowered through the ceiling. And the problem there was that he said your sins are forgiven.
Right.
And they took that as a blasphemous statement. So he had to say, okay, well, I'll heal him too. He seemed to have a lot less issue with that. So I think that fits more with the intertestamental, like late Jewish, especially on the Pharisee side, kind of mystical stuff that was going on. You know, they were plenty happy with healing. Healing is great. We have a huge problem with lepers. That's why we keep talking about lepers in the New Testament. You know, we have a huge problem with poor people. We have a huge problem with dirty people. You know, most of the law is about uncleanness because of this health condition and that health condition. We don't really care how you overcome it. Just come to the temple and do your procedure that you're supposed to do so you can rejoin society. But healing, they don't really care where it comes from. Didn't seem to.
Well, it kind of seems to me that they were already trying to build a case against him. So if they would have had prior knowledge that he was going to go down there and contact Jesus and have Jesus come to his home, that they would have tried to stop him or put a stop to it. But because it's still, even though it's a big crowd, it would still take a little time for the word to get back to them, basically. So is it just it's okay, well, the act has been done, the deed has been done, so what do we do about it? Do we forget about it? We throw it over in the bushes, or what? Or do we take action on it? That was my point.
Yeah, Mark is silent on it. Matthew and Luke don't really say anything about it either. I think where Trent was is it was still there was still a level of pragmatism about Jesus at this point, because they hadn't started to seriously build a case. Trent's right about the whole, if I heal by Beelzebub thing, and all that. But if this had been a couple of years later, he would have really been in a tight spot. He would have probably had to follow him over to some Gentile area or something. But at this point, he hadn't gotten there. Now, what's an interesting thing to think about is as the case against Jesus grew and the ire against Jesus increased, I think it's interesting. Where would this guy have been? He goes, "You guys can have all the problems with Jesus you want to. He healed my daughter." So, you can imagine that he would have fallen on the same side as Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea come the end, but just can't really know that. He was putting himself at risk, again, from a more social than technical side at this point. I think. Any other thoughts on that?
Well,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Trent.
I was to say cultural context is kind of the practice of the time, and you could see this early in the Book of Acts. That, I mean, even all the way to the level of the Sanhedrin, like the highest court, your first real offense that gets you hauled in front of the Sanhedrin or whatever level court, they might flog you for it. They're not going to go straight to stoning. They kind of give they give you that one warning. You're probably going to get hit for it, but then they say, "Okay, now go back to your life and don't do it anymore.
Don't do it again."
So, at worst, Jairus is probably facing that. But once again, like, if you make a claim to be God, that's blasphemous. Like, I've healed your sin, or as Jesus later did say, I'm he that you're searching for. Okay, now that's a problem. There's a specific commandment about that. There's not really a specific commandment that's being broken by healing somebody. We don't really know how, but okay.
And it would have been worse too if this had been a Sabbath, which was always
right. That was the other thing I was trying to think of.
Yeah, that's the other big bugaboo, is that so much of this stuff happened on the Sabbath, and I dare say Jairus had enough moxie about him not to do that. Because, like, you're right, Trent, because that would have gotten him in a commandment issue. Mm-hmm. That would have gotten him caught up in the Levitical law.
Mark goes out of his way to point out when it was on a Sabbath, and he doesn't say it over and over and over again, and he doesn't hear, so it's probably not.
Yeah, then you're talking a little bit of a scandal, possibly. So that's a little bit different. Preston, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think there were two important comments that were made that I just want to respond to. Dee's very senior, Chris, said that part of the reason that Jairus responded the way that he did is because his church, his synagogue, his religion failed him. Want to make a comment about that. And then the second one that I thought was pretty important is one that you made, which was perhaps in a couple of years, this would be an offense that would be one that would challenge his livelihood. And I think we have some evidence to that. But let's address the Elder D's statement. I think one of the things that we're unaware of is the first century practice of Judaism. So modern day Christianity has a healing element, has that kind of a mystical component attached to it. First century Judaism was about mitzvahs, was about living a good life, was about following the rules and the law. And if you were sick, well, that was something that's why the disciples were quick to say, whose fault is it? Is it this guy's fault or is it his family's fault? So sickness was an element that you didn't receive healing necessarily because you lived a good life and you follow the Ten Commandments or the 613 laws. You weren't entitled to healing the way that Christians today believe that Jesus' death allows us access to healing. So in terms of what their religion was doing, most folks, their participation in synagogue, their being bar mitzvahed or bat mitzvahed, and then them following the rules and the dictates of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that was good enough for them. They weren't necessarily expecting to have healing. This was almost a new thing, especially since it had been probably several hundred years since the kind of miracles that we see in Jesus's time had visited the Jewish people, number one. And then number two, Bruce says in a couple of years, this guy perhaps would have put his livelihood at risk. And it escapes me now. I probably should have taken a look at it. And I think it may be the paralytic at the pool. When we see him later on, and if it's not, it's the gentleman born blind. Jesus heals him, and when he is inspected by the Pharisees, their response is to put him and his family out of the synagogue. And that happens later in Jesus's ministry. But that evidence exists that is going to be the kind of situation that folks can have visit them if they look to Jesus for healing. It doesn't happen early in John or early in Mark, but we'll see that happen later in Jesus's ministry.
Yeah, you're right. You're talking John chapter 9, and they basically throw the son under the bus so they don't get kicked out of the synagogue. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Other thoughts on that? Any responses to Preston on that? Or like what you had to say about that, Preston? All right. I was going to throw one more thing out there. And I was kind of going with a position idea, just so I could kind of finish this up. I think, we sometimes, I think Christianity sometimes forgets that people that do have positions still need Jesus. We want to tell the easiest person we can tell, but the president, the mayor, the governor, the business owner, the lawyer, the doctor, they all need Jesus too. And we can sometimes kind of forget about that. But when the Lord opens the door, it doesn't matter what their title is. It doesn't matter what their pedigree is. They can come to know Jesus too. And to Trent's point from earlier, that may open up a whole different group of people that we can then have Advent to, because the guy says, the guy that lives in the the different neighborhood or drives a different kind of car or hangs out with a different kind of people, all of a sudden he says, I'm going to invite a bunch of my heathen friends over. Would you come over, talk to them about Jesus for me or whatever? I mean, you get those opportunities. So just wanted to say that as well about that. And it's interesting, Larry, you asked the question that got a lot of these answers coming here, is that I think maybe the back end of this entire account, at the very end of the chapter, we may see some of this kind of readdress itself. So let's hang in there and see where we go with that. But first, before we get there, we see this woman, this word is desperate here, woman that comes to Jesus as well. Starting in verse 25. I got to get there. Yeah, it was really windy, so I closed the door, but maybe you want to go open the door again, please? I'm sorry. A lot of drama in the Pratt household tonight. It's all good. Now, a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself the power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" Such a funny line. And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." So, Trent, you touched on this about all the different ways someone could be unceremonially clean or ceremonially unclean. And this is certainly one of those. And there's a lot of debate about what was the nature of her bleeding. Lots of writers tend to kind of go with some kind of a womanly problem, but just the issue of blood that got her there. So, and Mark is a little more anti-doctor, maybe, if I can say it that way. Certainly Luke kind of backpedals down on that, or soft pedals that bit a little bit. But essentially, she's out of options. She's out of money, and there's a sense that she's gonna die. No more money, nothing's working, and so she's staring at the specter of seeing her life going downhill fairly quickly. And so, but because she's ceremonially unclean, it's really a highly risky thing for her to come and just inject herself into this crowd of people. I mean, that would be a real issue. Talk about super spreader. I just, it's like unclean super spreader. So thanks for that, Trent. Thanks for reminding me of that phrase. Bad influence. But her actions, really what we see here is there was this long-held superstition that a person's power and their dignity could be transferred to their clothing. And we even see it going further in the book of Acts, where people were stealing handkerchiefs and stuff like that, right? From Paul. I think it was Paul, wasn't it, Paul? And at least Luke records they were being healed because of that. It goes back to that whole faith idea. And they even believe that even someone's shadow crossing you could bring that kind of healing. You start to see some other superstitious things there. And so that's kind of where her head was as she was there with Jesus. But I just wanted to geek out for just a minute on language and talk about where in verse 29 it says, "Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up. She felt it in her body, and that she was healed of the affliction." And it's kind of just a cool comparison to what salvation is like, from the standpoint that the dried up, the phrase dried up, and the word felt are both in what's called the aorist tense. And the aorist tense basically it's called punctiliar. Basically, it's a point in time. Okay, it happened. It happened at some point. But yet the word healed is that's in the perfect tense. And so that is a completed action that has a lasting effect. All right. And so I compare that to salvation, where there's a point where you have faith in Jesus Christ. There's a point in time where you come to know Jesus as your Savior and Lord, but your salvation has a lasting effect. It's that same kind of idea that we see here. So maybe that'll kind of get into the conversation as we go tonight. But beyond what Mark says, that Jesus felt his power released into this person. Beyond that, which Mark says that he felt that, why else do you think he asked the question, "Who touched me?" What other reasons might he have for asking that question out loud?
Well, he's got an object lesson to make. I kind of alluded it could be he's trying to teach Jairus something. But he's got a whole crowd that's watching this, and they're all jostling. It's not just about the potential impact of this unclean woman just touched all of you, and now you're all unclean too, and none of you can go to the temple for a week. Although that's a thing, and there was probably a pretty big gasp that came up when they figured out what happened, that she was there. But and that's probably part of her fear is, oh no, he is singling me out, and now I'm going to face this retribution from all these people that now hate me. But he didn't want to just kind of do the whole undercover, what we call undercover Christian.
Yep.
He's like, he wants to say it's your faith that healed you, but he needs somebody to say that to, so that everybody else can see that's the lesson.
Yeah. I mean, that's right where I think we need to be on this. You don't just get to be blessed by him, and then, I mean, the whole idea of what he does in our lives is for us to tell other people, to give him the glory, right? And so, yeah, he could have let her go, and he would have known, and she would have known, and then we're done, right? But yeah, I like the phrase you used there. He had an object lesson.
I think it's the opportunity to say the phrase, "Daughter, your faith has healed you."
Yeah.
It's not the magic has healed you. It's not rubbing my clothes healed you, and it's not whatever those goofy guys at the synagogue told you, or the witch doctors told you. Those guys that bled your four humors out and made you a draft out of witch hazel or whatever weird stuff they were doing. They probably sacrificed a chicken. Who knows?
Hey, it's always fun to watch.
Right, but he wanted to say out loud, "Your faith has healed you."
Well, see,
where everybody would be standing in a circle watching, already clutching their pearls, and then say, "What?"
In your answer, you actually gave us two, right? Because I mean, that really, those are two separate and distinct things. I think but they're both valid. Is one, he needed to teach something, but two, he needed to correct bad theology, bad thinking, and all of that, and say, it wasn't about touching my gown. It wasn't about touching my robe. It was about your faith. It's about your faith. Same thing that, and theologians wrestle with that about the whole handkerchiefs with Paul in Acts. It's like, well, Luke reported it as it happened, but you've got to fill in the blanks there and say, well, it wasn't about that they touched the handkerchiefs. It was about they had faith in the Lord, who was the one that Paul was preaching about. So it's a corrective for us as well. Other thoughts?
Well, it's just interesting that he asked a question, and I think Trent was spot on with that, because in all actuality, he already knew. Jesus knows everything, so he already knew who had touched him. So not only was he making a point to Jairus, but he was asking her basically to step out in truth and give glory where it was supposed to be.
Right.
Give glory to God.
Yeah.
Right. That's biblical. So, all right. So then what was the scope of the healing? He says, go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And I asked the question because in my reading, there was some interesting kind of amplifications on this. So what is the scope of his healing?
Well, he fixed her entire life.
Healed her body.
Yeah.
Gave her back.
Yeah, give back her social standing.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, like she can go to the temple again. She can go to synagogue again.
Yeah.
Um,
And if she's still working right, she can actually keep some of her money instead of giving it all to the witch doctors.
but I think there's also a catharsis kind of a moment here with all Greek tragedy where you go through some extreme experience, even though it's just the guys on stage. You go through it sitting in the audience, and then now I feel better because I let all of that out. I actually dealt with those emotions instead of just kind of papering them over in my life and hoping for the best. She was trembling in fear and fell at his feet, like, oh no, you caught me. Like, now everybody's going to know. And he comes from the complete opposite direction. No, your faith's healed you. Go in peace. When she was expecting him to hit the smite button.
Yep.
So did Jesus actually do something, or did her faith do it all?
I would say her faith in him led him to heal her. Power came out of him. That's very clear.
Yeah.
So his power had to heal her, but her faith unleashed that.
Right.
That's an amazing thought if you think about it. He didn't have to even think about it. I don't know if we give that much thought, but didn't even think about it.
Well, yeah, I thought about it millions of years ago.
Well, yeah, there you go. So that leads to a question that's the question in the question here is, because I'm reading this and I'm trying to decide whether or not I agree with this. Healed and saved is the same word, right? It's
Exactly.
the same word, oftentimes in Scripture. So, did he save her, or did he just heal her?
I think it really strongly implies that, well, number one, she was not only healed of the bleeding, but she was healed completely head to toe. She was even healed of the source of the problem, whether it was some type of a tumor or cancer or whatever. And it basically, to me, it strongly implies that her faith also led her to some type of a spiritual healing or salvation.
That's why I asked the question. I mean, I read, and there's definitely some bleed over on this one. Sorry for the phrase, based on this parable, or not parable, but this account. But when you start using the word faith and healed, it speaks to salvation beyond just the physical. And so I just throw the question out there to ask, all these people that Jesus is healing along the way, certainly when we did the paralytic, right? Your sins are forgiven, he said. So all these people that are getting healed that have faith in Jesus for their physical healing, are they being saved too?
Let's say it's not saved the way we think of it.
I'm on the track with you. What are you thinking?
Well, remembering the context, this is still Old Testament economy.
Indeed.
They're under the covenant, under the law. At this point, he's still preaching, I've come to complete the law, or fulfill the law, not to abolish it. He's still preaching, repent, for the kingdom is at hand. He's offering the kingdom as promised to Abraham and to David and to all the way down. So in that sense, it's less of a Christian salvation where it's your personal redemption, your adoption into a spiritual family for the spiritual purposes. It's she's redeemed back into the right standing in the covenant and is saved because of membership in the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob under the provisions of the covenant. It's part of the difference between today you'll be with me in paradise versus now we go straight on to third heaven, as Paul described it at one point. Not exactly the same arrangement. So saved in the sense that Jews in the Old Testament, with the covenant still active, are saved because of their standing and their right performance under the law. You know, they maintain the right relationship according to the law with God.
But
And
Abraham
therefore,
believing it was accounted to him for righteousness. That was before.
I would say that that's how the covenant was offered to Abraham.
Yeah. Well, I know where you're heading, and I don't want to get it. This may be a little more technical than I think I want to get with this. I'm trying to draw the distinction right where you started, which is this is pre-crucifixion, right? But this is Jesus on earth, and that would include Peter, James, and John as well. So I'm kind of drawing more of the comparison between him saying to this woman, your faith has made you well, go in peace. Peace is an operative word there. It's a very important word. Mm-hmm. And Jesus saying, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah, right? I mean, and Jesus said, upon this rock, I'll build my church. I mean, that was a pretty heavy proclamation. That was pre-crucifixion too. And so I'm just wondering, do those two things have the same, do they equate the same way?
I don't think they do.
I don't either. And that's why I asked the question. I don't think, and I asked the question so I can make this statement. I can't see, and this is kind of where some of what I was reading kind of went back to. Every time Jesus healed somebody, that wasn't saving them from hell. Sometimes he just healed people, even if their faith made them well, right? They still needed to have faith in Jesus Christ.
In a way it does, though. Especially as soon as the law came down through Moses. Now, nationally, in the old sense of the word nation having to do with your birth and your birthright, nationally, Israel was covenanted through their performance of the law that their salvation attached to the promised land comes as a corporate thing rather
But it
than
doesn't get them into heaven. They're not going to be in heaven because they're Jewish. I know you're not saying that.
No. And I think there are a lot of like intricacies, like way down with that. But
I think of the rich young ruler, right? I've done all these things. Paul said, I've kept all the law. I kept the law as far as it was concerned, but it still didn't count him for righteousness. As far as what we're talking about, I don't know if he said that.
In Paul's case, he had survived through the crucifixion and Pentecost.
True that.
Where the New Testament economy had taken effect or had become revealed, at this point it was not. When Jesus talks about, on this rock I will build my church, that's when he first started talking about this thing called a church.
Right.
There's some confusion because the Septuagint uses the word ecclesia in the Old Testament, but it's not meant to mean the same thing.
That's correct. Well, they use ecclesia to talk about a gathering.
Called out.
Yeah, exactly.
So just for pure word use, it's the same thing, but for theological usage, it's not. So for Paul, that was a meaningful distinction over the course of his life. If he had died right before Jesus did, then he would have been fine in accordance with his standing as a well-performing Jew. But since he survived through and made it past Pentecost and was into the new economy, then there's a different order involved. The rich young ruler was asking, I want to be one of your disciples.
Yeah.
And so Jesus said, oh, well, okay, then drop everything and follow me. Which is kind of a different question altogether.
It is, but I'm just making the point. He said, I've kept the law. I've kept the law. Right? I mean, they thought they could. That was the whole point, because they kept the letter of the law. But I'll take you to Romans 2, and I know that's post-Christ resurrection and stuff, but I mean, I don't think Paul was stumbling when he said, you know, you're not a Jewish person because of the circumcision. You're Jewish because your heart's been circumcised. I mean, I think that goes back to Amos and a whole bunch of other the Old Testament prophets. I mean, it's not about the action; it's about the heart. There has to be a change in the heart. So, I mean, I understand the covenant, and I think I don't want to go any further down this rabbit hole tonight. We could do it for a while, but and I think you and I are saying the same thing, but it's getting complicated. I think we're saying the same thing. So let me go back to what I asked.
I got a question.
All right.
What saves you?
You tell me.
Faith in Jesus Christ.
Faith in Jesus Christ for what?
For salvation.
From what?
From sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
If somebody believes on Jesus to heal them physically, and now we're talking New Testament, I'm talking today.
All right,
Does that-
but you
does that save them?
are saved by faith through Jesus Christ.
True.
Would you say that's a true statement?
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. This lady was just told by Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
All right. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction.
Okay.
So if she had faith in Jesus Christ, how can you say then that she did not obtain spiritual healing or salvation at that point?
Well, now we're going to get into a complicated.
I don't have the answer to it.
Well, we're going to get into a complicated place because Trent's exactly right. We're talking a few years before
Before he died on the cross.
crucifixion and resurrection and ascension, right? So we're still in the Old Testament economy here. I think where I have the rub is if somebody comes into church on Sunday, they came in on Sunday and they were struggling with some kind of health issue. And we prayed for them. And we prayed in the name of Jesus for them. And they were healed. Miraculously healed. Are they saved?
That's a good question.
They're not.
Because of that.
Not because of that.
Yeah.
Because it says that if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus,
Lord,
and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, then and only then will you be saved. And so that's why I'm just causing trouble, okay? But I'm just making the point. I'm just making the point.
That's the point I was making too. I mean,
we need to be careful about a substandard picture of what salvation really is, right? And Trent makes a good point. We're talking 2.5 years before Christ's crucifixion. So we're still in the Old Testament, and that's where he started taking us toward the idea of the covenant and all of that. It's a different kind of thing. And I mean, it's, you know, the Old Testament saints had faith for the future salvation. That's what Hebrews 11 talks about. That's the whole idea. Trent, I know that's where you were heading, was Hebrews 11. You know, I mean, those Old Testament saints had faith in something they didn't know. They had faith in something that was future tense, that they didn't have even for them way back when. They didn't even have the full revelation of Scripture. They were operating off of sometimes no Scripture. So, and I think I'm starting to get myself tied up in a knot. But
especially in the Old Testament, there's lots of examples of different things to be saved from.
Indeed,
you might use the word or words for saved. But I mean, it could be saved from that bear that's chasing you. You could be saved from Sennacherib and his army that's coming to destroy the country. It could be saved from the snake bite by looking at the bronze serpent that's lifted up, which is
a picture of Jesus.
Jesus.
Which is a picture of Jesus.
Yes, but
type.
in that case, you're being saved from physically dying because of the poison of a snake bite,
Right.
right? Or manna to save you from your hunger. You know, one of the temptations was Satan tempting Jesus in the wilderness was turn this rock into a bread. You're trying to give him a shortcut to be saved from the annoyances and the perils of human life on earth. Very little to nothing to do with any kind of eternal state considerations. Just save me from XYZ. Save me from the legal consequences of breaking the Sabbath. You know, there were a lot, you know, David had to run to a sanctuary city to be saved from Saul.
Absolutely.
You know, those are all kinds of things to be saved from that have nothing to do with heaven and hell.
Well, you make a great point, and it's kind of a semantic thing, but you know, New Testament salvation, New Testament as in us, you know, post resurrection. And I'm really cutting it really thin here, but it's as much a salvation to as it is a salvation from. And I think that, and the reason I make that point is I think a lot of people want to be saved from going to hell, as opposed to understanding that it's a salvation to the lordship of Jesus Christ in their life. It's a salvation to a new life in Christ. And so, and I'm glad that you brought that word up. I mean, it's so much getting saved from stuff.
And honestly, in our experience, there's a 3-layer or a 3 tense, like past, present, future tense experience of salvation from sin, right? And one of them is accomplished, and it has nothing to do with you at all. You're saved from the power of sin, whether you like it or not.
That's right.
That's what the cross is about, is the penalty of sin is done. It's passed.
Romans 8:1.
That's the question is, do you believe that or don't you? That's the whole question of the gospel. But once you have believed it, now you have the Spirit indwelling you and preferably often filling you according to your adjustment, which in the present is a present perfect tense. It's an ongoing experience of being saved from the power of sin in your life.
That's right.
You still have the tendency, the nature of sin in your flesh. You still have the world, and you still have Satan bringing temptations and difficulties and all these inducements to sin. It's still present for you, but so is God. So is the power of the Holy Spirit enabled by the work of Jesus Christ. You can currently be saved from sin. And then eventually you'll die. You will be separated from this corrupt version of your body. You will be saved from the presence of sin.
There it is.
But that's still in the future. You haven't even done that yet. So even if you are talking about New Testament salvation from sin, there's a lot to that.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Pastor, I know that this sounds like it's entangled, but I think that Larry poses a great question, and we don't have time to really fully flesh it out tonight, because I think the comments that you made are correct about this. This is confusing in part because Jesus actually heals a lot more folks than we see in these 4 Gospels.
Yep.
But I think a comparative to consider, so that it works for Larry, and it also follows brilliantly in the line of what Trent talked about, which is the Old Testament economy that Jesus had yet to fulfill versus the New Testament economy, is when Jesus allows us to understand the account of him healing the 10 lepers.
Yeah.
And when he heals the 10, only one comes back, because that one not only has received very likely healing of his being a leper, but also is putting his faith in Jesus as the Old Testament saints did. So all 10 received healing, but only one probably believed in Jesus for the remission of his sins that would have been credited to his account, the way that Abraham and the great saints of Hebrews 11 are documented.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So yeah, we see that dynamic. I'm just again, my caution is I don't think that we can say every time he healed somebody physically that that was a salvation experience. And it's a danger. It's a danger we run in our modern day. And I'm going to tell you where it happens. Faith healers. These people go and bring out the gurneys and the Ernest Angelies and the Miracle Spring Water cats and the dude who used to give out the prayer cloths, was it Robert Tilton, and all those other wackadoos. Even if they are effective in healing somebody. And that's my big challenge. My video keeps stopping. That's my big challenge with them, is they spend so much time hawking their Miracle Spring Water and hawking their towels and getting you to send them a bunch of money. They never get to the point about Jesus Christ is the answer to your life. And so don't watch that stuff. Camp meetings, all that gobbledygook, giving God a seed, all that stuff. I'm sorry, I'm going to get on my tangent. I better stop. See, Trent, I can go there too, by the way. So just stay away from that stuff. If you don't hear something about Jesus in the first 5 minutes that you watch something, just turn it off.
Get out and leave.
Yeah, just turn it off. It's not good. And there are some very good speakers on television, just none of them are. So I put the next question out here kind of more as a rhetorical question. I'm not going to spend any time really on it tonight. I just, what must Jairus have been thinking as Jesus is dealing with this woman, right? Remember, this whole thing starts because he's out there begging and pleading, Jesus, we need to go heal my daughter. And then this whole thing happens. And I want to put myself in Jairus's head and think, let's go, right? I mean, it's like, my daughter's dying, and you're messing around with this woman, who, by the way, right? He would have probably known about her too, quite frankly, and so just kind of put that out there. I just wanted to kind of give you a little mental exercise to think, what if I were Jairus? What if I were Jairus? Where would I be at that moment, right?
And blood flowing out of his face, because now the synagogue is going to be empty because none of these people can come now.
That's so true. You read this account and you're thinking everybody's going, "Oh, dude, I'm unclean now." So Mark didn't give us any commentary on that though. So that's fun. And they didn't have WebEx to do it, so they couldn't do it remote. None of that.
Can I ask a question of you again?
Okay, you can try.
Well, like you, what I wrote down on as an answer here is exactly what you said. He was probably thinking, Lord, we don't have time for this distraction. My daughter is on her deathbed. And so, do you think that maybe Jesus understood that he was having a little waver in faith there? And that's why he tells him, then don't be afraid, only believe?
He might. I think there's a lot of things that you can take out of this passage. I mean, you've got this guy who's on the top of the food chain, and you got this woman who's on the bottom. You've got that you're dealing with. You've got the case where, to your point, he came hoping that Jesus would help him, but then maybe wondering, can he help me? I think there's that too. Of course, the whole thing about just believe was that, and we're going to hit that in just a second. This was after he was told she's dead. So, I mean, that led to that comment on his part. My thing is, think about Lazarus. They came and he told him Lazarus was sick and dying. And Jesus says, great. And then he stuck around 2 more days. I mean, he intentionally stayed around until he knew he was dead, and that he wouldn't get to him to the 4th day, when the Jewish people thought that his spirit had left him and there was no way, no how he was going to be able to be raised from the dead. Jesus did stuff in his own time when he wanted to do it. And he wasn't in a hurry. And he's not in a hurry today. My pastor back in Virginia, before I became a pastor, used to say, God is rarely early, but he's never late. And you know, that's just where he operates. He's not in a hurry. And I think the lesson for me of Jairus is that, you know, I really counsel God a lot on how he should do things and when he should do things, when he's really got it all under control. So, I mean, I was that way today when I've been trying to get this county to okay the sunrise service, and I've been a whirling dervish at night in bed. I mean, I'm just tore all up. You know, wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, just you know. But I didn't get me anywhere except I haven't had any sleep in like 3 nights. But God had it under control. Jesus knew what he was doing. He knew he wanted his kids down there to celebrate his resurrection. He got it done. Not as soon as I wanted him to, but he got it done. So, any and all of that kind of stuff, Larry. I think there's a whole lot of teaching going on in this passage for all of us. So we see him coming back in with Jairus. So with the woman is wherever she is. You're healed. And so while he was still speaking, it says in verse 35, while he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? So imagine that he's kind of finishing up with this woman, and you can imagine them coming up and kind of whispering in his ear. He's like, you know, sir, it's too late. So we just get us going about our business. And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. So can you kind of see the dynamic? He's finishing up with her. He's speaking these words, and these people are saying this to him, and Jesus picks it up. And then just like without missing a beat, just turns around and says, just don't be afraid, just believe, only believe. And so, I mean, there's a lot of human dynamics going on in this passage at this moment. I mean, you know, if you were standing nearby, like probably Peter, James, and John were, you know, and they're watching Jesus deal with all of this dynamic. I mean, there's a lot of human drama going on at this point, to be sure. But it continues in verse 37, and he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. And he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha Kumi, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. Do you notice the commonality there? She's 12. The woman had been bleeding for 12 years. Kind of interesting connection there. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. So, first things first, Jesus ignores the report. He ignores the report. It doesn't matter to him. I mean, that was just water off his back. And so, Trent, you brought up about the uncleanness. There's a lot of uncleanness in this passage. I think you said it in that way, right? So not only does he have this interaction with the woman with the issue of bleeding, but now he comes into a dead body. And it says very clearly, he took the child by the hand. So he's touching a dead body. So talk about super spreader. I mean, he was like super unclean. You know, it's like he can't be any more unclean ceremonially than Jesus was at that point in his gang. So there you are. It makes mention in Matthew, by the way. Matthew mentions the flute players. And so apparently in this culture at this time, it was a requirement that if you had somebody die, that even poor people had to have 2 flautists and a wailer with them. I mean, that was just a requirement. And so you figure this guy is not a poor person. He's a leader in the community, a leader in the synagogue. So he's probably got, and when it uses the word tumult here, there's a lot of crying and wailing going on. Excuse me, I had a bug. A lot of crying and wailing going on at this place. And it made me think, it's like, well, quick did they get there? But you know, you
Probably hanging outside the door.
well, I'm thinking they were just ready. They were at the ready, right? I mean, just waiting. It's like, all right, it's kind of like a New York cabbie. I'm on the clock now. Wham, and off we go. But you know, I think it's probably like, huh?
The ambulance chasers.
Yeah, kind of like that, right? They were ready to go on the clock. So there you are. But Jesus has only his most trusted people, Peter, James, and John, right? We see those guys over and over again. They were the inner circle, and the parents. So Jesus, 2 parents, 3 guys, and the dead little girl. So that's all that was in this room, and probably that was a pretty crowded little room even to itself. So interestingly enough, some of the writers talk about the fact that that Mark quotes Jesus in verse 41 saying Talitha Kumi, which is just him speaking in Aramaic. Okay, that's all that was. But there's this kind of this thread that goes around that somehow that was some sort of an incantation. It's not. It's just quoting Jesus in the language that he spoke in. All right. So I mean, it's nothing spooky about that. There was a real push in that time. And Trent, you talked earlier about, you know, and Preston actually, I think, was talking about the mysticism and all of that. You know, I mean, there was a lot of people that thought that all this esoteric Hebrew words had a lot of incantational power to them, but that's not really the case here. And so, you know, he brings this little girl back to life, and then I think it's really cool, and I don't have it in the notes, but it's just a thought I had, you know, is that it says in verse 43, he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. And then this last phrase, and said that something should be given her to eat. You know, in the midst of all of this, I think it's so cool that we see that the Lord remembers the practical things too, as well, right? I mean, we don't know how long she's been sick. You know, she maybe hadn't eaten in days. And the Lord, in the midst of this amazing miracle to bring her back to life, says, get the girl something to eat. Right? So I love that about Jesus. He's all about the big stuff, but he's also about the little bitty details as well. I think that speaks so much about how he interacts with us in our own lives. But so the gorilla in the room is this. Why did he tell the people not to tell anybody? And just so I see Preston go, exactly. You know, consider the fact she's kind of exhibit A. I mean, she's dead. And now all of a sudden she's walking around. She's back in the synagogue next Sabbath. So what's the point?
Hey, Pastor, I don't want to answer the question at all just yet, but I do want to throw out this other component because
All
I
right.
kind of like the collation in that not only are we dealing with two desperate people, but we've also got kind of the component of secrecy that's being dealt with on both of these issues. But I also like to say that the lady with the issue of blood was likely not the only person that touched Jesus in the midst of that crowd. And now I'm going to be quiet.
Well said. And there might have been some other questionable individuals in the crowd based on what they were there for. That could have been any given day with him based on the crush. All right, so we're kind of being a little bit quiet. Let me break this down just a little bit. All right. What was he telling them? Because it just says very blankly, he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. Know what?
That he had the ability to overcome death at this point.
Why would he not want people to know that?
Well, this particular miracle hasn't happened or hasn't been seen in this community since very likely Elisha. So it's way more than 400 years. This is in many ways the superlative miracle that the Judaic community can experience. And Jesus is not yet ready for them to to present all of their dead to him as a remedy.
Yeah,
In
because
addition
we
to some
know when
other
he says
components.
come out, when he says come out of the grave, it works. It really does.
I mean, making sure people aren't aware that he could overcome death uh, plays into if everyone in Israel knew that he could overcome death, what's the point of sentencing him to death?
Okay. Now I'm gonna follow you on that one to the point though that I think Lazarus happened right before his crucifixion. They didn't like him too much.
And there were dead people that visited after his crucifixion.
Oh yeah. That's something we kind of I think just gets glossed over in the resurrection account big time. I mean, it was pretty creepy around Jerusalem there. I mean, Fear the Walkhead, man, that was the real deal. So they weren't dead.
I think there's, I keep going back to the culture of Judaism at the time, but he's kind of caught
Okay.
between Pharisees and Sadducees. The Sadducees don't believe that there is any continuation of your soul. You die and
Right.
you're done.
Resurrection.
Right. So that would be problematic to somebody who thinks you die and that's it. You know, there shouldn't be anything to come back. It's just a body. It's just dust. On the other hand, the Pharisees had a lot of the why can't I think of the word? The Catholic thing where you go purgatory.
Purgatory. Yep.
Purgatory came from some of the Pharisaical traditions at the time, which this kind of shoots that in the foot. We're sending this one off, and hopefully she'll go to paradise. We don't really know. She's 12. She just got the bat mitzvah or is about to do it.
I think just about to, right?
Yeah, I think it's at 13, right? So maybe she's been presented in the temple, but has not fully joined the adult community yet. Is kind of just seen but not heard. And you're sort of a hidden in your house, not really fully a person yet.
Still a child. Yep, still a child.
So, especially with in the synagogue scene is a little bit more lean towards the Pharisees. There's just a lot of complications that would have for their afterlife worldview.
Well, to your point right there, yeah, I think it's
He's just not in that part of his ministry yet.
right. Yeah, I mean, well, you know, the reason the Sadducees came to be front and center was because of the resurrection. You know, I mean, they don't show up much in the gospel accounts.
Right.
It's pre-resurrection. But once that starts to become the center of the message, right, was Jesus rose from the dead. And the Sadducees, man, they came out roaring in the book of Acts because they were upset. Yeah, so you're hitting on that for sure. I just give you a couple thoughts, about what this is probably about. There's just nothing original here. You know, Jesus needed to get out of there, and so he knew that message, the message that he had brought her back from the dead, was not going to stick long. I mean, we know that kind of over and over again. You know, don't tell anybody, and the next thing to do is tell everybody. And so he just needed to get out of there before the news got out. That's been one of the thoughts. There's been others that say that it was more about the manner in which he did it. I don't know if that holds any water or not, but you know, it certainly has been one of those things. There's been those that said that it was in response to those who mocked him just before he went in. You know, she's not dead, she's sleeping. And, you know, it's kind of that pearls before swine kind of thing. But I don't know if any of those are really satisfying. They're just different conjectures about that. I think the best thing is that, the reason Jesus typically told somebody not to tell was because he wanted to have some sort of freedom of travel, some kind of freedom of mission, and that's typically why he did that. Again, it was going to get out pretty quick, but and it does say, if you look at the first part of chapter 6, and it says, he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed. So there was a movement that he made at that point to get away from the crowd. So perhaps he just needed time to get away from them for a little bit. So hard to say. It's an interesting. There's whole books written on the quote unquote messianic secret and whether this is or whether this isn't, but that's a lot in the Gospels, quite frankly. So
neat. I think these are neat points, Pastor. But it's interesting as a contrast that when the lady with the issue of blood touches Jesus, he could have been silent about that. He's the one who calls attention and calls that out and makes that public. And then when he goes to Jairus's house, he calls in kind of his inner circle and then her inner circle. So when you talk about potentially the manner in which that was a component that we need to consider, I'm going to vote let's throw that out. And here's why. I actually think that that's a recipe, because Jesus does that a few more times, I believe, with the same inner circle group. And we see it in Acts when Peter goes to visit Tabitha. When Peter goes to visit Tabitha, he enacts the same recipe, so to speak, in order to help restore Dorcas back to life.
Yeah. So your point is that it's a formula in and of itself.
Yes, and not the magic, not the abracadabra, but the personal, private intimacy, and not to call attention so much to yourself as the agent, which Peter was at that case, as opposed to Peter and Jesus being there, so that it's a small group, and then that group can give honor to the Lord where the healing comes from, as opposed to the faith healer who's dressed in white, wielding the power of the Holy Ghost.
Well, to your point, and that's kind of what Trent was talking about, in regards to why he asked who touched him. There was an object lesson there. There was something that needed to be taught, as opposed to, Preston, to use your phraseology there, his compassion for the circumstance. So I can get on board with that. From a practical standpoint too, as soon as you go out and you tell everybody that your daughter just was raised from the dead, she's going to be a super celebrity for quite some time. Maybe it's smart not to bring all that on yourself, especially a 12-year-old girl.
Well, I almost think Jairus is the key to the character to the whole thing. I mean, obviously Jesus is at the center of it, but
Sure.
Jairus is the key character of the passage. I kind of hit it earlier, and it was sort of the point of bringing out object lesson as a concept. But it starts out, we speculate on Jairus's motives, and this is kind of why I went with the pessimistic, yeah, but version. Is he's instrumental. He just wants a transaction out of Jesus. He's got his life that he wants to maintain, and he just wants this to get taken care of.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, "Yeah, okay, but first, let's talk to this lady over here and make a big deal about how her faith healed her, without me having to say anything."
Yep.
And I almost think that's a, hey, Jairus, did you see that? Did you see what she did there? See how this works? This is about faith. It's not about what are you getting out of me. And so what's the next thing he says to Jairus? He doesn't even interact with the people with the reports that the girl's dead. He just goes and says, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Because
Right.
Jairus is still over here like, none of this makes sense anymore. Right? I just came for a miracle. I don't know what that was about. I just came to get some healing. That's all I wanted. And now you're telling me all this stuff, and now it didn't even happen. And what am I even doing here? And Jesus says, okay, fine, I won't waste your time. Let's go do it. And I think he left him alone with his thoughts, partly as a compassion thing, but partly as a, Jairus, you got to chew on this for a while. You got some learning to do.
Well, to your point on that, you also think if he knew, he knows people's hearts. If there wasn't going to be a change in Jairus, and we see this elsewhere in the Gospels, not everybody's a good spokesperson for Jesus, right? And so, yeah, if he's going to stay transactional, which I think is where he may indeed.
It's potential.
Yeah, I'm saying if he knew that's where he was going to head, then that's not the guy that you needed to be trumpeting his name in the synagogue.
And that seems to me like that's the pattern when he does something and then tells the guy, don't say anything, because I don't think you got the point of what this was about. Like, I came to heal. Sure, I came to provide. Sure, I came to, okay, fine. Like, I'm true to my word, but you're not getting the point.
Right.
And I don't want you to go tell your version of the story and confuse it for everybody else, because I have something better to tell them. And I need you to let me do that.
It was a different circumstance, but right, didn't we see that at the very end of last week's lesson? I mean, that he wanted to go with Jesus. He wanted to go with Jesus. He saw Jesus for who he was, apparently. And Jesus said, no, you need to stay here and tell people. So, right, he was a better messenger.
And then the only other instance is the transfiguration. Same 3 disciples.
Yep.
It's kind of a preview of this is what the true form. This is the redeemed body. This is
right.
The king and his kingdom. Because he had just said, some of you will
not taste death before
you see the resurrection.
Right.
Because he had just told them for the first time, hey, I'm going to go die.
Yeah.
We're all like, what? No. They don't get it. They don't believe it. They don't understand what the real story is.
Right on.
Well, okay, hold on. I need to give you some hope here.
Yeah.
But there's no way that you understand what you just saw. So don't go saying the wrong things.
Exactly. Because they would not have represented it correctly without
until after the resurrection actually occurred.
Absolutely.
And then the Holy Spirit comes and then it dawns on them.
Yeah. Now you could write it in a gospel account. It'll all make sense. Absolutely. Put it in the right place, even contextually. So well said. You guys, I don't think I'm the only one of this group that really is gaining an appreciation for the depth with which this considered simplest of the Gospels. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've said this before, I think people overlook Mark and the depth that is in this Gospel. By the way, as far as this particular is concerned, this particular set of miracles, Matthew is really quick. I mean, boom, boom, Matthew's in and out. Whereas Mark, he takes his time, and Luke does as well. But interestingly, Matthew just gets through this in a very few verses compared to Mark's account. So I would always encourage you is go back in your own before or after the lesson and read the parallels just to see the color that's there. And I'll try to bring out the parts again that make some sense. But thank you for your time together tonight, guys. We'll be in chapter 6 next week for lesson 12. Let's have a word of prayer. We can be dismissed. Thanks for your input tonight. It's just always, I'm learning as much as you guys are, so it's pretty cool.